The story of Frankie Levins begins on Elfreth's Alley, the narrow cobblestone street in Philadelphia, often called America's oldest residential block. In that historic setting, among the row houses where his large Irish-American family lived, Frank grew into a boy whose quiet confidence would one day carry him onto a national stage. Long before his name appeared in teen magazines, he was simply one of 8 children, darting between games with his siblings and stealing moments to practice dance steps on worn wooden floors. It was the summer of 1957 when Frank first stepped into the bright lights of Studio B, joining the phenomenon known as American Bandstand. With his steady smile and fluid rhythm, he quickly became a familiar face between 1957 and 1961, paired with dancers like Peggy, Leonard, or Pat Molittieri. Viewers across the country saw in him something authentic, not showy or self-conscious, but genuine. The boy next door who moved as if music had always been part of him. Fan clubs sprang up, letters arrived, and Frank's presence became part of the fabric of teenage America. Yet, even in those years of recognition, a paradox lingered. Frank never sought stardom. He carried himself like someone who belonged to both worlds, the television screen and the quiet Philadelphia street where it all began. And that duality would shape every step of his journey. That ordinary childhood on Elfreth's Alley was about to collide with something extraordinary, the world of American Bandstand. Before American Bandstand made him recognizable, Frank Levins was a boy whose roots ran deep in the heart of Philadelphia. He grew up on Elfreth's Alley, the country's oldest continuously inhabited residential street, where history seemed to echo through every cobblestone. His family was large, 8 children in all, and the Levins household was alive with energy. In that bustling home, where voices mingled around the dinner table and chores were shared among many hands, Frank learned the patience and steadiness that would later define his presence both on the dance floor and in life. The Levins family was of Irish-American heritage, proud of their traditions, but also attuned to the rhythms of a changing America. In the 1950s, the nation was riding a post-war wave of prosperity, and teenagers were beginning to emerge as a distinct cultural force. Philadelphia's neighborhoods echoed with the sound of radios tuned to the latest rock and roll hits. For Frank, those sounds were irresistible. He didn't just hear the beat, he felt it. Music moved through him naturally, urging him to try new steps, to keep pace with the energy of a generation finding its voice. At school, Frank was known as a steady, approachable boy. He wasn't loud or brash, but friends gravitated toward his calm demeanor. When music played at neighborhood gatherings, he often ended up in the center of the floor, not because he demanded attention, but because his movements seemed effortless. A pair of scuffed shoes told the real story. Countless hours of practice, both at home and in local social halls, had already given him a fluency in dance that set him apart. His mother played a crucial role in shaping this path. She encouraged him not to think of dancing as a frivolous hobby, but as something that gave him joy and confidence. It was she who nudged him to take opportunities beyond the neighborhood, to try his luck at the local television programs that were beginning to feature teen dancers. Without her gentle push, Frank might never have stepped into the spotlight that would make him a part of American television history. Family life remained central to who he was. Even as music pulled him toward new experiences, Frank stayed close to his brothers and sisters. One of them, Bob Levins, would eventually join him on Bandstand, creating a rare bond between siblings who shared not just a home, but a place in popular culture. Their presence on the show became part of family lore, a reminder that even as television turned teenagers into national figures, they were still just kids from Philadelphia at heart. In those years, Frank's dreams were simple: to keep dancing, to enjoy the music, to be part of the excitement that was sweeping through American youth. He had no ambitions of fame or celebrity. What he wanted was to keep moving to the rhythm that made life feel full. That rhythm, nurtured in a modest home on Elfreth's Alley, was about to carry him into Studio B. That ordinary childhood was about to open a door into something extraordinary, the first steps onto the stage of American Bandstand. For Frank Levins, the road to American Bandstand began long before his name ever reached television screens. His earliest experience with broadcast dance came on a smaller Philadelphia program called Grady and Hurst. For about 6 months, he honed his steps there, learning how to carry himself under lights, how to let rhythm guide his movement even when cameras were rolling. Those evenings gave him a taste of what it meant to be part of something larger than a neighborhood dance, though nothing could have prepared him for what would follow. By the summer of 1957, excitement around Dick Clark's American Bandstand was building. Teenagers lined up outside Studio B in their best outfits, hoping for a chance to be chosen to step inside. The show was transforming from a local broadcast into a national sensation, and those who made it past the studio doors became part of a cultural shift sweeping the country. Encouraged by his mother, Frank decided to try. He didn't push or shout to be noticed, but his steady charm and natural rhythm set him apart. Before long, he was no longer just one in the crowd. He was one of the regulars, part of the fabric of the show. Walking into Studio B for the first time was an unforgettable moment. The cameras loomed overhead, the lights were blinding, and the air buzzed with nervous chatter from teenagers realizing they were on national television. Yet when the music began, Frank's nerves gave way to instinct. He moved the way he always had, calm and fluid, as though the stage were simply another neighborhood hall. His presence wasn't flashy, but it was magnetic. Viewers at home saw a boy who seemed authentic, someone who belonged as much to their world as to the world of television. That first broadcast was exhilarating, a rush of sound and motion. When Frank later looked back, he described the surreal feeling of dancing while the red "On Air" sign glowed and the country looked in. Letters soon began arriving, fan clubs started whispering his name, and suddenly the boy from Elfreth's Alley had become part of America's living rooms. Yet for Frank, it wasn't about the attention. It was about belonging to something bigger, a movement that celebrated youth, music, and the freedom of expression that defined a generation. That summer was a turning point. From the cobblestones of Elfreth's Alley to the dance floor of Studio B, Frank Levins had crossed into a new world. The first steps were just the beginning, a prelude to years in which his face and rhythm would become fixtures of American television. And soon, his quiet presence would not only make him recognizable, but elevate him to one of the memorable figures of Bandstand's golden years. That first dance was only the beginning. Soon, Frank Levins would shine at the very peak of American Bandstand's fame. By the late 1950s, American Bandstand had evolved into a national ritual, and for Frank Levins, those broadcasts were the defining stage of his youth. From 1957 to 1961, his steady presence turned him from a Philadelphia teenager into a recognizable face in homes across America. Viewers tuned in not only for the music, but also for the dancers who embodied the spirit of the age, and Frank quickly became one of the figures people watched for. He didn't shout for attention or dominate the camera, yet his quiet confidence and graceful rhythm left a mark that fans never forgot. On screen, Frank seemed at ease. Where others stiffened under the hot lights and relentless cameras, he flowed naturally with the music. His steps were smooth, his timing precise, and his body language conveyed calm assurance. That sense of poise made him a sought-after partner. With Peggy Leonard, one of his most frequent pairings, Frank found a natural complement. Her energy blended with his steadiness, producing dances that looked effortless. Together, they became a visual shorthand for teenage grace, inspiring young viewers to try the same steps in living rooms and gyms across the country. But Frank's popularity was not tied to a single partner. He was seen alongside Pat Molittieri, whose bold personality contrasted with his composed style, and those appearances drew speculation about whether their connection extended off the floor. Later, he was linked with Franny Giordano, adding to the aura of curiosity that surrounded him. The truth was simpler. Frank was adaptable. He could move comfortably with different partners, allowing their energy to shine while anchoring each dance with his own rhythm. That ability to blend and support made him one of the most versatile regulars on the program. Teen magazines and fan clubs picked up on this appeal. Black and white photos of Frank with his partners circulated among fans, who wrote letters and collected clippings. His image became part of the broader teen culture that American Bandstand helped to define, a mixture of style, music, and innocent romance. What audiences loved about Frank was precisely what made him distinctive. He looked real. He wasn't trying to become a star. He was just a boy who loved to dance, and that authenticity resonated with millions. Beyond the cameras, Bandstand was a place of competition. Regulars vied for the best camera positions, the most screen time, the recognition that could come with one well-timed smile. Frank navigated that environment with quiet persistence. He wasn't aggressive, but he was reliable, and producers knew they could count on him to deliver. His adaptability, his ability to complement strong personalities, and his steady composure made him invaluable on a show where appearances mattered as much as skill. At the peak of his visibility, Frank represented more than just a dancer. He embodied the balance American Bandstand sought to project: respectful, wholesome, yet fully immersed in the vitality of rock and roll youth culture. He was, in essence, a bridge between tradition and rebellion, between the cobblestones of Elfreth's Alley and the sleek new world of television. For the fans who watched him week after week, Frank Levins became part of their adolescence. He wasn't the loudest or the flashiest, but he was unforgettable. And as his years on Bandstand unfolded, the story of his partnerships, the duos and the behind-the-scenes moments that kept viewers talking, would add another layer to his legacy. Because behind every graceful step was a partnership, and those pairings, both on and off the floor, would soon define Frank's most memorable years on American Bandstand. On American Bandstand, partnerships were more than choreography. They were stories in motion. For Frank Levins, the partners who shared the floor with him helped define his place in the show's history. His most memorable pairing was with Peggy Leonard, a dancer whose brightness complemented Frank's calm steadiness. Together, they created an image of harmony that captured the imagination of viewers across the country. A 1960 photograph of the two shows them poised and confident, radiating a chemistry that was as much about trust as it was about rhythm. For many fans, Frank and Peggy represented what teenage dancing was supposed to be: authentic, balanced, and full of life. But Peggy was only part of Frank's story. He was also linked with Pat Molittieri, whose bold personality and energetic presence contrasted sharply with his understated style. Their dances seemed to spark, the push and pull of two strong but different energies. Rumors swirled in fan circles that the two dated for a time, and while the truth was less dramatic, the speculation only heightened Frank's allure. Later, mentions of him being paired with Franny Giordano added another dimension, weaving his name into the fabric of Bandstand's teenage romances, whether real or imagined. Behind the scenes, the show was both structured and spontaneous. Rules were strict, dances had to remain wholesome, interactions had to reflect the clean-cut image that Dick Clark demanded. Yet within those boundaries, moments of genuine fun slipped through. Frank and his partners were sometimes caught laughing after a near misstep or improvising when the band played faster than expected. These unscripted flashes made them relatable. Viewers loved the polish of the show, but they also cherished the small imperfections that revealed the dancers were just ordinary kids. The culture of competition was always present. Regulars jockeyed for camera positions, knowing that where you stood could mean the difference between being seen by millions or disappearing into the background. Frank rarely forced his way forward, but his composure and adaptability ensured he was often visible. He was the partner others could rely on, and producers knew he could anchor a segment without drama. That quiet reliability became his trademark, even if it meant he was sometimes overshadowed by flashier personalities. Decades later, photo collectors and historians occasionally confused his identity with other dancers, evidence of how seamlessly he fit into the larger bandstand ensemble. But when the details were sorted, Frank's presence always came back into focus. He may not have been the loudest figure on the floor, yet he left an indelible impression on those who watched carefully. His legacy was in the partnerships that worked, the laughter between steps, and the authenticity he brought to every broadcast. For all the glamour of the spotlight, however, change was inevitable. By 1961, Frank had been a regular for 4 years, and life beyond the studio walls was calling. The friendships and partnerships, the competition and the camaraderie, all of it had been formative, but it could not last forever. The same discipline and steadiness that made him a sought-after partner would soon guide him toward a very different path, one that would take him far from the cameras of American Bandstand. Because behind every perfect dance was the reality of growing up. And for Frank Levins, the moment was coming when the music of Bandstand would give way to the call of a new life. By 1961, Frank Levins had spent 4 pivotal years as a regular on American Bandstand. He had entered the show as a teenager, eager simply to dance, and emerged as a familiar figure in living rooms across the country. Yet even as the music played on, Frank began to sense that his life was moving toward a different rhythm. Responsibilities outside the studio grew heavier, and America itself was changing. The post-war innocence of the late 1950s was giving way to a new decade, one defined by sharper choices and greater demands. For Frank, the turning point was near. That year, he enlisted in the United States Army and joined the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg. The contrast could not have been greater. One day, he was gliding across the floor under studio lights. The next, he was enduring the rigor of military drills, parachute training, and the discipline of life in uniform. Yet those who knew him were not surprised by his decision. The steadiness he had shown on Bandstand was the same quality that made him suited to the Army. He took pride in the commitment, embracing a new identity that had little to do with television and everything to do with service and duty. The transition was not without cost. Leaving Bandstand meant leaving behind the friendships, the partnerships, and the camaraderie that had defined his adolescence. Fans noticed his absence. Some wondered aloud if he would ever return, while others quietly accepted that he had chosen another path. For Frank, the feelings were mixed. He missed the music and the thrill of live television, but he also felt a quiet relief. Fame, however modest, had never been his true ambition. He wanted stability, a foundation on which to build a life. What made his departure different from some of his peers was its finality. Others tried to leverage their television exposure into careers in entertainment, hoping to extend their moment in the spotlight. Frank, however, stepped away without regret. Bandstand had been a cherished chapter, but not the whole story. He carried its memories with gratitude, not as unfinished business. In many ways, his choice to leave was consistent with the authenticity that had made him stand out in the first place. He was never acting for the cameras, he was simply being himself. When he marched away from the studio and into the discipline of the Army, Frank left behind the world that had made him recognizable. Yet, he was walking toward a future that would prove no less meaningful. The boy who had once danced across millions of television screens was beginning the journey of becoming a man. One who would define himself not by fleeting fame, but by the life he built afterward. Fame had faded, but a new life was waiting, and Frank Levins was ready to embrace it. When Frank Levins stepped away from American Bandstand in 1961, he traded the camera's glow for the discipline of the United States Army. Serving with the 82nd Airborne Division gave him experiences far removed from the dance floor, parachute jumps, rigorous drills, and the responsibility of belonging to one of the Army's most respected units. Yet, even in uniform, Frank carried the steadiness and composure that had defined him on television. Those qualities helped him transition from the world of teenage fame to the life of a man building his own path. After completing his service, Frank returned to Philadelphia determined to prepare for a stable future. He studied at Spring Garden College before continuing at Drexel Institute of Technology, focusing on mechanical engineering. For the next 4 decades, he built a career marked by precision, integrity, and reliability. Whether solving technical problems in the field or guiding projects in sales engineering, colleagues remembered him as someone who worked quietly but left a lasting impact. In 2014, after more than 40 years in his profession, Frank retired, proud of a career that reflected the same discipline he had shown since his youth. But Frank's life was never just about work. Dance, the very passion that had carried him into Studio B, never truly left him. In later years, he attended ballroom dance weekends, where the music once again brought him joy. At one of these gatherings in the Catskills, he met Elizabeth, whose warmth and shared love of dancing drew them together. They married in 2002, and their partnership brought Frank perhaps his greatest happiness. Together, they traveled widely, especially to Portugal, Elizabeth's homeland. The couple returned there 18 times, savoring its culture, seafood, espresso, and football. For Frank, Portugal became a second home, a place where he felt both welcomed and renewed. Family and friendships remained central. Frank was close to his siblings, particularly Bob, who had also danced on Bandstand. The bond between the brothers became part of the Levins family's lore, a reminder of how extraordinary those years in Studio B had been. Frank also stayed in touch with fellow regulars. At reunions and anniversaries of Bandstand, he reconnected with dancers from his youth. The music of the past seemed to collapse time. A familiar song would play, a smile would be shared, and suddenly they were teenagers again, spinning across the floor. For fans who attended or later read about these reunions, seeing Frank return, older, gentler, but still graceful, was deeply moving. In retirement, Frank was remembered as a man of warmth and kindness. Friends described him as a gentle soul, someone who listened more than he spoke, and who carried himself with quiet dignity. His life was not defined by celebrity, but by love, loyalty, and simple pleasures. A shared meal, a dance step, a journey with Elizabeth. The boy who once danced across millions of screens had built a full, contented life beyond the spotlight. And yet, when old friends and fans spoke his name, it was always with affection, as though the image of him moving gracefully across the bandstand floor could never fade. He may have stepped away from the cameras, but his presence never vanished, and his legacy still dances on in memory. Frank Levins's life reminds us that legacy is not measured only in fame, but in the grace with which one moves through every chapter. On American Bandstand, he was the steady presence who made dancing look effortless, a boy from Elfreth's Alley whose calm confidence stood out on a stage filled with youthful energy. Off-screen, he built a life defined by service, dedication to his career, and the love he shared with family and friends. His story proves that the glow of the spotlight may fade, but the warmth of a well-lived life endures. Fans still remember his partnerships with Peggy, Leonard, Pat Molittieri, and others, moments captured in black and white photographs that remain part of a generation's collective memory. Later, at reunions and in quiet conversations among fellow regulars, Frank's name carried the same affection it always had. He was not only a dancer of the past, but a man whose humility and kindness became his lasting mark. Were you among those who watched him glide across the bandstand floor? Do you remember a song, a step, or a smile that has stayed with you through the years? Share your memory, because it is in those recollections that Frank's story continues to live. If these memories touched your heart, we invite you to stay with us here on American Bandstand Memories. Subscribe to our channel, and you won't miss the next story of the dancers, the music, and the era that shaped a generation.